bring in the member of the Judiciary, Foreign Relations, and Appropriation Committees, Democratic Senator Chris Coons of Delaware. Senator, always good to see you. Help us out here. How does this change? How does this move? How do we get our way out of the government shutdown? Because as we've been saying all morning, and as you know, this is not happening in the abstract. The paychecks will be missed tomorrow by 800,000 federal workers, many more hundreds of thousands of contractors who depend on the federal government. The president says $5.7 billion for a border wall or bust. Chuck Schumer, Nancy Pelosi, your caucus say no way. How do we get our way out of a shutdown?
Well, I don't expect the president to capitulate, but he has to find a way to compromise. There's already bills that we've passed in the Senate near the end of last year. Majority Leader McConnell put a bill on the floor. Every senator voted for it unanimously to reopen the government until February 8th. We've also voted out a Homeland Security bill that would give the president another $1.3 billion for border security. He is going to have a very tough time getting funding for a border wall, particularly with the new Democratic majority in the House. And I think it's time for the president to start finding a face-saving way to accept another $1.3 billion for border security. There are important things we can invest in to strengthen our security as a country, but Democrats are convinced that building a concrete border wall in the desert between Texas and Mexico is not an effective, modern way to secure our country.
But as you just said yourself, the president's probably not going to move off of that. He's been promising the border wall. He's been leading chants since 2015
That's right.
of his big crowds. If he backs off that, he looks like he's capitulated and given up and lost his base on that question. So how do you convince him it's in his interest to move a little bit? And how do we stop this from going on in perpetuity to have government shutdowns whenever the president doesn't get what he wants?
Well, first, there's going to be a lot of real pressure on Republican senators in particular, as 800,000 families all over the country who work directly for the federal government miss that paycheck tomorrow. In church last Sunday, a friend came up to me and politely said, you know, my daughter and her husband are both federal employees. They won't be able to meet their mortgage if they go more than one paycheck. I suspect lots of my colleagues are having similar conversations, whether it's with TSA folks at the airport, or it's with neighbors or friends, or it's with people in law enforcement. There are going to be tens of thousands of federal law enforcement officers who will not get paid. I know the president's actively toying with the idea of an emergency declaration. That would likely get blocked in court. And a number of folks who are legal analysts, like Professor Bruce Ackerman at Yale Law School, have suggested that's really risky for the Department of Defense to allow themselves to be used as a construction brigade for the president's vanity project. One positive step forward, I think, Willie, is that new Chairman Lindsey Graham of the Judiciary Committee and Senator Tillis joined Senator Booker and me in reintroducing the Mueller protection bill. I'll remind you, every day that we're talking about this shutdown, we're not talking about the Mueller investigation, and there have been some dramatic developments in that investigation in the past week.
And we want to get to that in just a second.
Senator Donny Deutsch, pleasure to talk to you. Let's role-play war game out, because when you say Trump has to compromise, he won't. He will declare an emergency. And his talking points will be, I opened the government, the Democrats wanted to keep it shut, I need to protect this country, and the Democrats want to go to court to keep the government shut and make the country unsafe. Go. Your talking points, and keep in mind, it will go to the courts, and he wins at that point. So what do you do?
I'm not sure he wins at that point, but I'll say this. Democrats believe in investing in making our country safer, but doing it in smart and effective ways. And a border in the desert, look, for the 2,000 miles of our border, there's more than 1,000 miles of it where it's private property,
no, but you're
and it is miles and miles away.
Senator, I just want to, because this is real-life stuff. He's going to do that. You're still now, he won at that point, and you're now giving kind of very logical, rational, but it's in the courts. And he has reopened the government. And he has said the Democrats want to keep it shut. So you guys have to have a very specific laser response to that.
Donnie, today on the floor of the Senate, we are going to, all of us as Democrats, demand that Republicans take up and vote on the bill that would reopen, for example, the Department of Treasury and IRS, so everybody can get help with this new tax bill and with their refunds. We are going to do day after day after day votes on the floor to reopen the government. I hope it's clear to the American people that Democrats want to reopen the government, are voting to reopen the government, and are investing in border security. What we're not doing doing is giving him more than $5 billion for a vanity project at the border when he hasn't spent the $1.3 billion we appropriated last year.
Senator, this is Heidi. Do you understand what the wall is? Let me just explain
It's a symbol.
this. In order to have a negotiation, you have to understand what the ask is. I've looked at the letter that the White House has sent to you all, and the border is 220 miles long. In
Right.
this letter, there's only itemized money for 200 miles of wall. So do you understand specifically what the president is even asking for in this negotiation?
That's one of the big challenges with negotiating with President Trump. A number of folks who claim to represent him, different Republican senators, have called or met with Democratic senators and said, what about this compromise? What about this compromise? And as Senator Graham himself has learned somewhat painfully last year when he talked about Tuesday Trump and Thursday Trump, you can craft a reasonable bipartisan compromise on something like border security, including fencing, just to have the president blow it up the next day. His own departing chief of staff, John Kelly, just 2 weeks ago, said publicly, oh, we stopped talking about a concrete wall months ago. It's a terrible idea. It's not effective. We're really talking about steel slats. The next day, President Trump tweeted, no, 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 we haven't given up on a concrete wall. It is difficult for his vice president, for senators in his own party to negotiate on President Trump's behalf, because even though that letter may say that's what he's asking for, President Trump in person often changes position at the last moment. That's why Mitch McConnell is absent from these negotiations.
You could offer him a fig leaf, right? Because he's not defining it. So why not just give him an off-ramp? Give him a fig leaf. End it.
I will tell you, there have been repeated efforts to give him an off-ramp. He needs to publicly come out and say, this is what I will accept, and have it be a compromise for us to move forward. He is very difficult to negotiate with. That's one of our core challenges. That's why Mitch McConnell is nowhere to be found in these negotiations.
Senator, it's Jonathan Lemire. Confirmation hearings for the president's attorney general pick, William Barr, begin shortly. Senator, your Democratic colleague, Senator Klobuchar, said she has not been able to meet with him yet. Right. But we know that the Republican Lindsey Graham has. Sir, have you met with the attorney general nominee yet? And if not, what sort of concerns do you have that this is breaking down on party lines?
I haven't met with him. I have requested a meeting with him and was not able to meet with him yet. I'm looking forward to sitting down in person. Folks who served with him in previous administrations say very positive things, and Lindsey Graham, the new chairman of Judiciary, claims that he's fully committed to protecting the Mueller investigation. My core concerns will be his history with the use of presidential pardons to clear senior executive branch officials who were convicted or who were charged with significant crimes. This now goes back decades. And what he has recently said about the Mueller investigation, in particular, a memo that he sent in to Rod Rosenstein, the Deputy Attorney General, and his views of executive power. I'm concerned that more and more there are folks at senior levels of this administration and newly on the Supreme Court who have an unbounded view of the president's power to fire people at will. Those are core concerns for me as I meet with Bill Barr. Haven't had a chance to schedule it or an opportunity to meet with him yet.
Okay, Senator Coons, what I really want to know is what was going through your head yesterday when you were in the Oval Office with the president signing the human trafficking bill, and he turned and said how much he likes you and you pray together. I would love to know what was going through your mind at that point. However, I'm going to ask you about the Mueller probe. You're going to reintroduce the bill to protect Special Counsel Bob Mueller. It hasn't got anywhere in the past. What makes you think it might have any chance now?
Well, I'll disagree respectfully, Kathy, with the idea it hasn't gone anywhere. When we introduced it, we were told we'd never get a hearing. Then months later, we got a hearing. We were told we'd never get a markup. Then we got a vote and got it out of committee. The only thing blocking it from being passed in the Senate has been Mitch McConnell. And with a new Democratic majority, Jerry Nadler, the new Democrat chairman of the Judiciary Committee in the House, I think it will get taken up, voted, and passed by the House fairly quickly.
Right, but Mitch McConnell's not going to shift.
I think Mitch McConnell will block it, and I think that will continue to be a challenge for us. But it is important that there be clear public bipartisan pressure to protect the Mueller investigation. Kathy, what went through my head that moment was that I'm grateful for the chance to be the leader of the Senate prayer breakfast along with Republican James Lankford. And I'm glad that President Trump signed that bill together, that bipartisan bill yesterday, because it advances an important bipartisan fight to combat human trafficking. A real tragedy all over the world that our Department of State and Department of Justice does important work trying to end sex slavery, trying to end labor slavery in dozens of countries around the world and here in the United States.
And we applaud your work on that, Senator. As we let you go here, I just want to button up our conversation about the wall. Democrats, Chuck Schumer, Nancy Pelosi, have been indignant. They've been outraged about the very idea of a wall on the border. Nancy Pelosi calling it immoral to put up a wall on the southern border. But as you know, in 2006, there was the Secure Fence Act voted for by many, many Democrats. The vote was 80-19 in the Senate. Hillary Clinton, Barack Obama, and yes, Chuck Schumer voted for that 700 miles of fence along the southern border. Are they being disingenuous? Are they being hypocritical now to be suddenly outraged about the very idea of a barrier along the southern border?
Well, Willie, all Democrats want to vote for border security. That's what was in the bill that came unanimously out of the Senate last year. That's what I would vote for again. I think we have a real problem with our broken immigration system, and we should be trying to reach for a bigger solution than that. Obviously, I wasn't here in 2006, but I would vote to invest more in border security. What I'd like to see us investing in is modern technology, modern solutions that are cost effective and that will help solve this problem.
Do you think walls or fences are immoral along the southern border?
Personally, I don't think a fence, if it works, if it's what DHS says is most needed, is immoral. What I think is being talked about here is more some of the immoral immigration practices of this administration, dividing children from their parents at the border, treating families in ways that are profoundly risky, dangerous, that violate basic humanitarian principles. That's what I think is being discussed as immoral, is some of the broader immigration policies of this administration.
All right, covering a lot of ground with Senator Chris Coons this morning. Senator, thank you as always for your time. We always appreciate it.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.